1532 South Drake at the church main entry front door.
Lieutenant, can you give us a call back, please?
Park at 4400 Black Oak North Damon. This is several cars illegally parked. They have the alley blocked off at both entrances.
My name is Tommy Ishmael, and I was the security director of First Baptist Church of Maryville, located in Maryville, Illinois, just outside the city of St. Louis. First Baptist Church of Maryville is a Southern Baptist denomination. It's located in the city of Maryville, Illinois, which is just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. It's a small town, about 7,000 people. On March 8th, 2009, my pastor, Fred Winters, was murdered when Terry Joe Sedlick, a 27-year-old individual from Troy, Illinois, which is just outside the city of Maryville, walked into the church. He walked right down the middle aisle to the altar where my pastor was engaged in giving his first sermon for the day. He asked him, "How are you doing, brother?" There was an unidentified conversation, at which point Terry Joe Sedlick pulled out a Glock 45 caliber pistol and started shooting. The first shot went through the pastor's Bible. Two other shots happened as the pastor began to run down the side of the altar. My pastor jumped off the stage, and with the last shot, Terry Joe Sedlick shot my pastor through the heart. My pastor died on the scene. At First Baptist Church of Maryville, I was the security director. It was a volunteer position. There was no pay associated with it, so everything that I put in was on my own time. I was qualified for the job by virtue of my past experience in education. I had Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. I had an associate degree in disaster preparedness. I had an associate degree in aircraft armament systems, and I had 31 years of experience dealing with natural disasters and other emergency events. On March 8th, the only security measures that we had in place were strictly volunteer security. My pastor had asked for any serving law enforcement or off-duty law enforcement to begin carrying their pistols into the service. My function was to talk to all of the law enforcement officers retired, put them in touch with each other, make sure everybody knew each other, and there was somebody available if it was possible for them to be at church. Most of the congregation was very receptive to that. It was very uninvolved, and it was not very visible. It was very low key, but yet it was secure. There was no ongoing training involved at First Baptist Maryville. When I stepped into the job, what I brought with me was what I had when my pastor was murdered. At that point, we really did not have a seriously functioning security team as much as we had just volunteer law enforcement watching over our congregation. We did not have anybody patrolling. There was no outside security at all. We did have greeters from time to time that would go out depending on the weather. They would help elderly out of their cars, open doors, make sure everybody could come in if they needed a wheelchair, bring one in. But there was nobody watching the parking lot or watching cars at that time. The reaction of the congregation was very interesting. It was a combination of running, following active shooter advice, run, fight, hide. And there was also a reaction of some people to stay and render aid. So we saw the whole gamut of human reactions. There was panic and screaming. There was complete control. Some sides of the church, there was chaos and disorder. On other parts, there was just complete structured order and response. After the shooting, well, you might have expected the community to turn away and for the church membership to die off. And we actually thought that our church might die because of this very, very unfortunate situation. What we saw was the exact opposite. Our community began coming together and our church began coming together to support each other. Through a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, people began coming back to church. Tithing began to increase within our church. We saw more money come in, allowing us to reach out and do the things that we needed to do. After all was said and done, we came out on the other side of this shooting very hurt, very devastated, but healing. And we put ourselves back in God's hands after this and just prayed for him to heal us. On March 8th, when Terry Sedlick shot my pastor, we didn't really have a complete security program in place. We also didn't have protocol of what to do if somebody approached the altar. If we'd have had a serious security program in place, if we'd have had protocol of what to do should somebody in the middle of a service while the pastor's speaking approach the altar, we could have intervened with this gentleman. We could have prayed with him. We could have asked him what he wanted. At the very least, we could have gotten between him and the pastor, and we could have stopped that murder. The things that we should have done differently was we should have started from the parking lot. We should have had outside observers. We should have had greeters and ushers meeting people at their car, saying hi, checking them out, helping them to come into the building. Inside the building, we should have had somebody observing, a greeter or an usher, to look at somebody to see if anybody was out of place, if they didn't fit, they didn't match, if the timing was right. Inside the sanctuary itself, we should have had security teams, whether they're volunteers or paid professionals. Somebody should have stood ready to provide a guard around the pastor or around anybody else if protesters or some violence broke out somewhere. In the future, every church that I'm at, I would recommend that just grown adult males be very intentional in their observations on people, try to determine what is going on with them, and then not being hesitant to step forward and talk to them, to pray with them, ask them their name, just to be personal with them and just show them that they've come to the right place and that people at that church do care about that person. After the pastor's murder, a lot changed regarding security and safety. The Board of Deacons came together and voted to give security a budget. We had a lot more men come forward and ask to be put onto the security team, and they stepped forward and began doing many of the things that I've described. The church came together as an organization and voted to have a formal security director put in place to make decisions. At that point, I was voted formally by the church to become the security director. And I also had the authority at that time to expend funds to put people where I needed them to begin to protect the pastor the way he should have been protected. We were also provided space inside the church to establish security offices. We began putting in security cameras, and the church began putting money against requirements so that we were able to put in approximately 100 cameras, and then we were able to monitor those from a secure room. We also, in the camera room, started a camera team that became very professional on how they operated and ran the cameras and began feedback to security teams. We acquired radios and began communicating with each other about what we were seeing and observing, and it made response time a lot quicker. And we also interfaced a lot more with security forces in the local area, the law enforcement professionals, the state police, the county police, and the city police. We got to know them. They began coming by the church. And then finally, we actually hired a security company to come in and provide rental security. So when we needed it, we could have armed security officers present to watch over the congregation. I think other people need to know that church safety and security needs to be taken seriously. I don't think it's appropriate to go down the road of having a gun in every church without addressing all of the other requirements. It's far more likely that we're going to have a tornado event or an earthquake event, and we need to be prepared in a church to recover from those. You need a safety team headed by a safety professional that's comfortable with that area right there. We need to be prepared for fires. We need to be prepared for missing children. I also think that in security teams, what we need, again, is professionals running this, and I think they need to be interfaced with the pastoral staff in a church. I personally believe that no security team should be out there with a director of security that is not responsible to or reporting to a pastor in the church. Above all, a security team needs to be a ministry. It needs to be manned and run and controlled by people who are godly men, but who report back to a pastor for control. Personally, the murder affected me quite severely. I had a lot of guilt that I dealt with. I dealt with a lot of emotions on this, a sense of failure. But it also strengthened my faith because it brought me to realize that if God had wanted something seriously different, God had the power to change circumstances. And I firmly believe that. For a while, I was second guessing God and thinking I probably was in charge. I now put my faith more firmly in God. But I also believe that the Bible gives us the wisdom. When Nehemiah talks about manning the walls, I believe that guidance applies to us nowadays. I believe when David had the mighty men of David, those guys were there for a reason. God could protect David, but those guys were also put there to protect David. I think churches need to look biblically at how we handle security in churches, and we need to respond accordingly. I think pastors need to understand the threat to our church and our threat to our congregations and be willing to work with security teams so that we have an even balance across the ministries of reaching people with the gospel and also keeping them safe. And the security teams need to realize, when I would go back and teach them that I learned this, the number one goal of a security team is to forward the gospel. It's to keep the people of the church safe so that the gospel can be put out to all of the people and that somebody can come forward and be saved. In closing, I want to go back and address a few things. First of all, Terry Joe Sedlick was never convicted in court. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was deemed to be schizophrenic. He's still locked away in a DCFS home for the criminally insane. At this time, everything that we know, everything that we talk about is our personal observations. It's our personal conversations with our friends. It's our interviews with the police, with the state police, with the county police, with the local police department. I don't know if it'll ever be brought to justice or not. As I wrap this up, I did go back and look to see what my pastor's wife had to say about all of this. And to quote her, "No good would come out of this. Nobody can profit by this. It's all up in God's hands, and we just have to give it over to God."